The millionaire invited a waitress and her son to his party for fun. But when she touched the piano, Jonathan Blackwell stood at the window of his penthouse suite, gazing out at the glittering New York skyline. At 45, he had everything money could buy: a successful hedge fund, properties around the world, and a social circle that included the city's elite. Yet, as he contemplated his upcoming birthday, he felt an inexplicable emptiness. His perfectly tailored suit couldn't hide the wariness in his steel-gray eyes or the lines etched around his mouth, not from frowning, but from years of practiced, insincere smiles. Jonathan had mastered the art of charm and networking, but genuine connections eluded him. As he turned from the window, his eyes fell on the invitation to his own birthday gala, an extravagant affair at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The guest list read like a who's who of New York society, each name carefully chosen for their influence or net worth. Jonathan sighed, already anticipating the tedious small talk and thinly veiled business propositions that would dominate the evening. On a whim, he decided to have breakfast at a small diner near his office, a place he'd noticed but never entered. As he pushed open the door, the cheerful tinkle of bells announced his arrival. "Welcome to Rosie's. Sit wherever you like, hon," called a warm voice. Jonathan looked up to see a woman in her late 30s, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun, smile lines crinkling around her bright green eyes. Her name tag read Lucy. As Lucy poured his coffee, Jonathan found himself drawn into easy conversation. It was refreshing. No pretense, no agenda, just genuine human interaction. He learned that Lucy was a single mother, working 2 jobs to support her 10-year-old son, Max. "He's quite the little pianist," Lucy said proudly, showing Jonathan a video on her phone of a young boy playing a complex piece on an old upright piano. As Jonathan prepared to leave, he made an impulsive decision that would change everything. "Lucy," he said, pulling out one of his birthday invitations, "I'm having a party this Saturday. Why don't you and Max come?" Lucy's eyes widened in surprise. "Oh, that's very kind, but we couldn't possibly." "I insist," Jonathan interrupted, surprising himself with his earnestness. "It would be nice to have some real people there." As he walked out of the diner, invitation left on the counter, Jonathan felt a spark of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. Little did he know that this spontaneous act of kindness would lead to a revelation that would shake the very foundations of his carefully constructed world. The night of Jonathan's birthday gala arrived, transforming the Metropolitan Museum of Art into a glittering wonderland of champagne fountains and ice sculptures. The city's elite milled about in designer gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos, their laughter echoing through the grand halls. Jonathan stood near the entrance, mechanically greeting guests with practiced charm. His eyes, however, kept darting to the door, searching for Lucy and Max. As the evening wore on, he began to lose hope that they would come. Just as he was about to give up, he spotted them. Lucy looked stunning in a simple black dress, clearly not designer, but elegant nonetheless. Beside her, Max fidgeted in a slightly too large suit, his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the opulent surroundings. "Lucy, Max, you made it," Jonathan called out, genuinely pleased. As he approached them, he couldn't help but notice the curious and somewhat disapproving glances from nearby guests. Lucy smiled nervously. "Thank you for inviting us, Mr. Blackwell. It's all quite overwhelming." "Please call me Jonathan," he insisted, guiding them further into the party. "And don't worry, just be yourselves. Trust me, it's refreshing around here." As they made their way through the crowd, Jonathan introduced Lucy and Max to various guests. Some were polite but dismissive, while others didn't bother to hide their disdain at the presence of a waitress at such an exclusive event. Max, meanwhile, seemed oblivious to the social undercurrents. His eyes were fixed on the grand piano in the corner of the room, currently being used as a prop for a floral arrangement. "Mom, look," he whispered excitedly. "A Steinway, just like in the videos you showed me." Lucy squeezed his hand. "I see it, honey, but we can't touch it. It's just for decoration." Jonathan overheard the exchange and felt a pang of sadness. Here was a child with genuine passion and talent, and the piano was being used as nothing more than an expensive table. As the evening progressed, Jonathan found himself enjoying Lucy and Max's company far more than that of his usual social circle. Their genuine reactions to the art and the excitement of being in such a grand space were a breath of fresh air. However, not everyone shared Jonathan's appreciation for his unusual guests. He overheard snippets of conversations, whispered judgments about gate crashers and charity cases. The situation came to a head when Evelyn Hartley, a prominent socialite and one of Jonathan's largest investors, approached him with a glass of champagne and a saccharine smile. "Jonathan, darling," she drawled, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "your little project is certainly causing a stir. But don't you think it's time to end this little social experiment? After all, we have important matters to discuss." Jonathan felt a flash of anger, but before he could respond, he noticed Max tugging on Lucy's sleeve, pointing insistently at the piano. In that moment, Jonathan made a decision that would alter the course of the evening and his life. "Actually, Evelyn," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly hushed room, "I think it's time for some entertainment." He turned to Max, kneeling down to the boy's level. "Max, would you like to play something for us?" The boy's eyes lit up, but Lucy intervened, her face flushed with embarrassment. "Oh no, we couldn't possibly. Please," Jonathan insisted. "I'd love to hear Max play. Consider it a birthday gift to me." After a moment's hesitation, Lucy nodded. As Jonathan led them to the piano, he could feel the weight of every gaze in the room. The crowd parted, a mix of curiosity and barely concealed disdain on their faces. Max sat at the piano, his small frame dwarfed by the magnificent instrument. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the air, silencing every whisper, every clink of champagne glasses. The boy's fingers danced across the keys with a skill and emotion that seemed impossible for his age. As the beautiful melody washed over the stunned crowd, Jonathan glanced at Lucy. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat. Lucy wasn't watching Max. Her eyes were fixed on the piano itself, a look of profound recognition and long-buried pain etched across her face. In that moment, Jonathan realized that there was far more to Lucy's story than he had ever imagined. And as Max's music continued to enchant the paralyzed guests, Jonathan knew that his life and the lives of this waitress and her extraordinarily gifted son were about to change forever. As Max's fingers danced across the keys, Jonathan couldn't tear his eyes away from Lucy. The look on her face was one of complex emotions, pride in her son's performance, yes, but also a deep, haunting sadness that seemed to go beyond the music. When the final notes faded away, the room erupted in applause. Max beamed, basking in the attention, but Lucy remained frozen, her gaze locked on the piano. Jonathan gently touched her arm. "Lucy, are you all right?" She startled as if waking from a trance. Yes, it's just this piano. I know this piano." Before Jonathan could ask what she meant, they were swarmed by guests, all clamoring to congratulate Max on his extraordinary performance. As the crowd thinned, Jonathan noticed an elderly man approaching, his eyes fixed on Lucy. It was Arthur Steinway, the current head of the famous piano-making family. "Excuse me," Arthur said, his voice quavering with emotion, "but you look remarkably like someone I used to know, a brilliant pianist named Elizabeth Caldwell. Any relation?" Lucy's face paled. "Elizabeth was my mother," she whispered. Arthur's eyes widened. "Good heavens, then you must be little Lucy. I never thought I'd see you again after what happened." Jonathan looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "I'm sorry, but what exactly is going on here?" Lucy took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "This piano, it was my mother's. She was a world-renowned concert pianist. This very instrument was custom-made for her by Steinway & Sons." Arthur nodded solemnly. "Elizabeth Caldwell was a prodigy, one of the greatest talents of her generation, but she disappeared at the height of her career, right after a performance at Carnegie Hall. No one knew what became of her or the piano." Lucy's voice was barely above a whisper. She couldn't handle the pressure. The constant touring, the demands of her career, it was too much. She left everything behind, her fame, her fortune, this piano. She took me, changed our names, and we started a new life. Jonathan felt as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. The waitress he had invited on a whim, the woman he had thought he was doing a favor for, was actually the daughter of a famous pianist, an heiress to a legacy of musical genius. "But how did the piano end up here?" he asked. still trying to process this revelation. Arthur shook his head sadly. It was sold at auction years ago. We had no idea it was here. To think all this time. As the implications of this discovery began to sink in, Jonathan noticed Max, who had been listening intently to the conversation. The boy's eyes were wide with wonder and a newfound understanding of his own extraordinary gift. Lucy knelt down next to her son, tears now flowing freely. "Max, sweetie, I'm so sorry I never told you about your grandmother. I thought I was protecting you from the pressures that broke her. But now I see the music is part of who you are, who we are." As mother and son embraced, Jonathan felt like an intruder on a deeply personal moment. But he also felt a sense of awe at the role he had inadvertently played in reuniting this family with their lost legacy. The revelation of Lucy and Max's true identity would soon spread through the party like wildfire, forever changing the trajectory of their lives. But in that moment, as the small family clung to each other in front of the piano that held so much history, Jonathan realized that he had received the greatest birthday gift of all. The chance to witness a long-buried truth come to light, and with it, the beginning of a remarkable new chapter in the lives of Lucy and Max Caldwell. As the night wore on and the party began to wind down, Jonathan found himself in a whirlwind of activity. News of Lucy and Max's connection to the legendary Elizabeth Caldwell had spread quickly, transforming the waitress and her son from outsiders to the center of attention. Music critics who were present at the party were already hailing Max as the second coming of Caldwell, while art collectors and museum curators buzzed about the rediscovery of Elizabeth's long-lost Steinway. In the midst of it all, Lucy looked overwhelmed, torn between pride in her son's newfound recognition and anxiety about the sudden exposure of their past. Jonathan watched it all unfold with a mix of emotions. He felt a sense of joy at having played a part in this miraculous reunion, but also a creeping sense of guilt. Had he unwittingly thrust Lucy and Max into a spotlight they weren't prepared for? As the last of the guests were leaving, Jonathan made a decision that would alter the course of not just Lucy and Max's lives, but his own as well. He approached Lucy, who was sitting at the piano with Max, gently running her fingers over the keys. "Lucy," he said softly, "can we talk for a moment?" She looked up, her eyes a mix of gratitude and apprehension. "Of course, Jonathan. I don't even know how to thank you for tonight, for everything." Jonathan shook his head. "No need for thanks, but I do want to make you an offer." He took a deep breath before continuing. "I'd like to set up a foundation in Max's name. To support his musical education, to preserve your mother's legacy, and to provide scholarships for other talented young musicians who might not have the means to pursue their dreams." Lucy's eyes widened in shock. "Jonathan, that's incredibly generous, but we couldn't possibly accept." "Please," Jonathan interrupted gently. "This isn't charity. It's an investment in talent, in the future of music, and it's a way for me to do something meaningful with my wealth. Something that isn't just about making more money." As Lucy considered his offer, Jonathan could see the internal struggle playing out on her face. Accepting would mean embracing a world she had deliberately left behind, exposing Max to the very pressures that had broken her mother. But refusing would mean denying her son the opportunity to fully explore his extraordinary gift. After what seemed like an eternity, Lucy looked up at Jonathan, her decision made. "All right," she said softly. "For Max, for my mother's legacy, we accept." The consequences of this decision were immediate and far-reaching. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Jonathan's team of lawyers and financial advisors worked tirelessly to set up the Elizabeth Caldwell Foundation for Musical Excellence. Max was enrolled in a prestigious music school, his talent nurtured by some of the best teachers in the world. Lucy, with Jonathan's encouragement, began to reconnect with her own musical roots, even giving small performances at local venues. The media latched onto the story, dubbing it the Diner to Carnegie Hall fairy tale. Lucy and Max found themselves thrust into a level of fame that was both exhilarating and terrifying. There were television appearances, magazine covers, and even talk of a Hollywood biopic. For Jonathan, the consequences were equally profound. His decision to establish the foundation was met with mixed reactions in his business circle. Some praised his philanthropy, seeing it as a savvy PR move. Others, like Evelyn Hartley, were less impressed. "Really, Jonathan," she drawled during a tense meeting, "I hope you know what you're doing. Charity is all well and good, but this is becoming an obsession. Don't forget where your real responsibilities lie." But Jonathan found that he cared less and less about the opinions of people like Evelyn. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose that went beyond accumulating wealth. He threw himself into the work of the foundation, discovering a passion for nurturing young talent that he never knew he possessed. His relationship with Lucy and Max deepened, moving beyond benefactor and recipients to genuine friendship. He found himself looking forward to their weekly dinners, where Max would excitedly share his latest musical achievements, and Lucy would regale him with stories of her mother's career that she was slowly piecing together. As the months passed, Jonathan realized that his impulsive decision to invite a waitress and her son to his birthday party had not just changed their lives. It had fundamentally altered his own. The emptiness he had felt on that night, staring out at the New York skyline, was gradually being filled with something he had been missing for far too long: genuine human connection, and a sense of making a real difference in the world. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with both incredible opportunities and daunting challenges. But as Jonathan watched Max take the stage for his first public recital, Lucy beaming proudly from the front row, he knew that whatever came next, it would be a journey worth taking. While Jonathan, Lucy, and Max were navigating their new reality, a secondary drama was unfolding behind the scenes. Arthur Steinway, moved by the rediscovery of Elizabeth Caldwell's piano and the emergence of her grandson's talent, had begun a deep dive into the company archives. What he uncovered was a long-buried scandal that threatened to tarnish not just the Steinway name, but the entire classical music establishment. In a dusty file, Arthur found a series of letters between his father, then head of Steinway & Sons, and Elizabeth Caldwell's manager. The correspondence revealed a disturbing pattern of exploitation and manipulation. Elizabeth, it seemed, had been pushed to the brink by relentless touring schedules and unrealistic expectations, all in the name of profit. Her disappearance hadn't been a mystery. It had been a desperate escape from a life that had become unbearable. Arthur was torn. Revealing this information would provide closure to Lucy and validate her mother's decisions. But it would also expose decades of unethical practices in the industry, potentially damaging Steinway's reputation and that of many other major players in the classical music world. As Arthur grappled with this moral dilemma, another player entered the scene. Evelyn Hartley, still smarting from what she perceived as Jonathan's betrayal of their social circle, had begun digging into Lucy's past. She hired a private investigator, determined to find something, anything, that would discredit the waitress-turned-heiress and, by extension, Jonathan's judgment. What Evelyn didn't realize was that her investigation was about to intersect with Arthur's discovery in ways that would shake the foundations of New York's high society and the classical music world. Meanwhile, Lucy was facing her own internal struggle. As Max's fame grew and the pressure to perform increased, she found herself reliving her mother's experiences. She saw the same signs of stress and anxiety in Max that she remembered seeing in her mother years ago. One evening, after a particularly grueling practice session, Lucy found Max crying in his room. "I don't want to disappoint everyone," he sobbed, "but sometimes I just want to be a normal kid." Lucy's heart broke. She realized that in trying to support Max's gift, she had unknowingly started down the same path that had destroyed her mother. She knew she had to make a change, but doing so would mean confronting Jonathan and potentially jeopardizing everything he had done for them. As these various threads began to intertwine, the stage was set for a confrontation that would force everyone involved to confront hard truths about ambition, ethics, and the true cost of success. Arthur Steinway, burdened by his family's past sins, was preparing to come forward with the truth. Evelyn Hartley, armed with what she thought was damaging information about Lucy's past, was ready to launch her social attack. And Lucy, torn between protecting her son and honoring her commitments, was on the verge of making a decision that would alter the course of all their lives. Jonathan, still basking in the glow of his philanthropic success, was unaware of the storm brewing around him. But soon, he would be forced to confront the unintended consequences of his well-meaning actions and make choices that would test his newfound sense of purpose and his blossoming relationships with Lucy and Max. The fairy tale that had captured the public's imagination was about to face its harshest reality check, and the outcome would depend on the choices made by each player in this complex, intertwining drama. As the weeks turned into months, the relationships between Jonathan, Lucy, and Max continued to evolve in unexpected ways. What had begun as a chance encounter between a millionaire and a waitress had blossomed into a deep, multifaceted connection that defied easy categorization. Jonathan found himself spending more and more time with Lucy and Max, not out of obligation to the foundation, but out of a genuine desire for their company. He discovered a joy in simple pleasures he had long forgotten. Movie nights with Max, where the boy's commentary on film scores opened his eyes to a new way of experiencing cinema. Quiet conversations with Lucy over coffee, discussing everything from music theory to philosophy. For Lucy, the journey was more complex. She was deeply grateful to Jonathan for the opportunities he had provided for Max, but she also struggled with feelings of dependency. There were moments when she caught herself wondering if their friendship was genuine, or if she was just another of Jonathan's charitable projects. These doubts came to a head one evening after a foundation event. As Jonathan was driving them home, Lucy suddenly said, "You don't have to do this, you know." Jonathan glanced at her, confused. "Do what?" "This," Lucy gestured vaguely. "Spending time with us, pretending we're friends. I appreciate everything you've done, but I don't want you to feel obligated." Jonathan pulled the car over, turning to face Lucy fully. "Is that what you think this is? Obligation?" His voice was soft, hurt evident in his tone. "Lucy, you and Max, you've given me more than I could ever give you. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm part of something real, something meaningful." The vulnerability in Jonathan's admission struck Lucy deeply. She realized that despite his wealth and status, Jonathan had been just as lonely, just as in need of genuine connection as she had been. From that moment, their relationship deepened. The walls of formality and gratitude crumbled, replaced by a genuine friendship built on mutual understanding and respect. Max, too, was growing closer to Jonathan. The boy had begun to see him as a father figure, someone who understood and supported his passion in a way that went beyond mere financial backing. Jonathan found himself taking on an unexpected mentorship role, guiding Max not just in his musical pursuits, but in navigating the complexities of his newfound fame. One particularly poignant moment came after Max's first major public performance. The boy had played brilliantly, but backstage, Jonathan found him in tears. "What's wrong, Max?" he asked, kneeling down beside him. "You were amazing out there." Max looked up, his eyes conflicted. "I was thinking about Grandma Elizabeth, how she ran away from all this. What if I'm not strong enough either?" Jonathan felt a surge of protective instinct. "Max, listen to me. Your grandmother made the choice she thought was best for her and your mom, but your path is your own. We're all here to support you, whatever you choose. The music is a gift, but it doesn't define you." As he comforted Max, Jonathan caught Lucy's eye. She was watching them from the doorway, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. They were no longer just benefactor and recipients, or even just friends. They had become a family, bound by something deeper than blood or legal ties. This shift in their relationship dynamic didn't go unnoticed by the outside world. Tabloids began to speculate about the nature of Jonathan and Lucy's relationship, while some in Jonathan's social circle muttered about the gold-digger waitress who had ensnared the eligible bachelor. But for Jonathan, Lucy, and Max, these external opinions mattered less and less. They had found in each other a sense of belonging and understanding that had been missing from their lives for so long. As they navigated the challenges of Max's budding career, the pressures of the foundation, and their own personal growth, their bond continued to strengthen. They were no longer three individuals brought together by chance and circumstance, but a unit, supporting each other through every high and low. Little did they know that this newfound family bond would soon be tested in ways they could never have anticipated, as the secrets of the past and the machinations of those threatened by their happiness converged to create a perfect storm. The annual gala for the Elizabeth Caldwell Foundation was in full swing. The grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the very place where it had all begun a year ago, was filled with the elite of the music world, philanthropists, and society figures. Jonathan, Lucy, and Max stood together near the stage, a united front as they prepared for the evening's main event. Max's performance on Elizabeth's restored Steinway, now the centerpiece of the foundation's efforts. As Max took his place at the piano, a hush fell over the crowd. But just as he was about to begin, Evelyn Hartley's voice rang out, sharp and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue, there's something you all need to know about our hosts." All eyes turned to Evelyn, who stood near the back of the room, a triumphant smile on her face. Lucy tensed, instinctively moving closer to Max. "Our dear Jonathan has been deceived," Evelyn continued. "This woman," she pointed at Lucy, "is not who she claims to be. I have proof that she's been lying about her identity, her past, and her mother's legacy." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jonathan stepped forward, his face taut with anger. "Evelyn, this is neither the time nor the place." But he was interrupted by another voice, this one coming from near the piano. It was Arthur Steinway, looking pale but determined. "If we're revealing truths tonight," he said, his voice quavering, "then there's something else that needs to be said." He pulled out a stack of old letters from his jacket. "These letters prove that my family, along with others in the music industry, were responsible for the pressures that drove Elizabeth Caldwell away. We exploited her talent, pushed her to the brink, all for our own gain." The room erupted into chaos. Reporters who were covering the event began shouting questions. Society figures whispered furiously among themselves. In the midst of it all, Lucy stood frozen, her eyes locked on Max, who looked confused and frightened. Jonathan, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control, made a split-second decision. He strode to the center of the room, his commanding presence silencing the crowd. "Yes, there have been secrets," he said, his voice steady and clear. "But tonight isn't about the past. It's about the future. It's about a boy with an extraordinary gift, and a family that has overcome incredible odds to be here tonight." He turned to Lucy, extending his hand. "Lucy, I believe there's something you'd like to say." Lucy hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath and stepped forward. "My name is Lucy Caldwell," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I am the daughter of Elizabeth Caldwell. I've spent years hiding from that truth, trying to protect my son from the pressures that broke my mother. But I realize now that in doing so, I've been denying a part of who we are." She walked to the piano, placing a hand on Max's shoulder. "The music is in our blood. It's not just a gift, it's a responsibility. And thanks to Jonathan and this foundation, we have the chance to use it to help others, to change the way the industry works." The room was silent, all eyes on Lucy and Max. In that moment, Jonathan felt a swell of pride and affection for this remarkable family that had come into his life. Max looked up at his mother, then out at the crowd. Without a word, he turned to the piano and began to play. The melody that filled the room was hauntingly beautiful, a piece that Lucy recognized as one of her mother's unfinished compositions. As the music swelled, Jonathan saw tears in Lucy's eyes. He moved to stand beside her, taking her hand in his. Together they watched as Max's music began to heal the rifts that had been torn open, creating a new beginning from the ashes of the past. The climactic revelations had not destroyed them as their enemies had hoped. Instead, it had given them the chance to confront the past openly and honestly, emerging stronger and more united than ever. In the days following the gala, Jonathan, Lucy, and Max found themselves at the center of a media storm. The revelations about Lucy's identity and the Steinway family's past had become front-page news, sparking debates about ethics in the music industry and the nature of legacy. Jonathan's PR team worked overtime trying to control the narrative, but he quickly realized that the only way forward was through complete transparency. He called a press conference, with Lucy and Arthur Steinway by his side. "We're here today to address the events of the Elizabeth Caldwell Foundation Gala," Jonathan began, his voice steady. But more importantly, we're here to talk about the future. Lucy stepped forward, her head held high. Yes, I hid my true identity for years. I was afraid of the pressures that had broken my mother, afraid of what that legacy might mean for my son. But I've learned that running from the past solves nothing. We have to face it, learn from it, and use it to create positive change. Arthur Steinway, looking older and more vulnerable than ever, spoke next. The Steinway family, along with many others in the industry, must take responsibility for the harsh conditions that drove talents like Elizabeth Caldwell to the brink. We cannot change the past, but we can ensure it doesn't repeat itself. Jonathan then outlined a series of initiatives: an independent review of industry practices, mental health support for young musicians, and a commitment to ethical talent development. The Elizabeth Caldwell Foundation will lead the way in creating a more supportive, sustainable environment for artists, he declared. The press conference was a risk, but it paid off. The public responded positively to their honesty and commitment to change. However, not everyone was so easily won over. Evelyn Hartley and her allies in high society continued to whisper about scandal and deception. Some of Jonathan's business associates questioned his judgment, wondering if his involvement with Lucy and Max had clouded his financial acumen. Lucy, too, faced challenges. Some in the classical music world accused her of riding on her mother's coattails, questioning her own talents and motivations. Max, despite his youth, wasn't spared from criticism, with some suggesting his abilities were being exaggerated for publicity. Amidst this turmoil, Jonathan, Lucy, and Max clung to each other, their bond growing stronger in the face of adversity. They had long, honest conversations about their fears, their hopes, and their commitment to each other and the Foundation's mission. One evening, as they sat in Jonathan's penthouse after a particularly grueling day of meetings and interviews, Max surprised them both. "I want to take a break from performing," he said quietly. "Just for a little while. I love the music, but I think I need to be a kid for a bit." Lucy and Jonathan exchanged glances, a mix of concern and relief on their faces. "Of course, sweetheart," Lucy said, pulling Max into a hug. "Whatever you need." Jonathan nodded in agreement. "The music will always be there, Max. Taking care of yourself is what's most important." This decision, when made public, was met with mixed reactions. Some praised them for putting Max's well-being first, while others accused them of wasting his talent. But for Jonathan, Lucy, and Max, it was a turning point. They realized that their strength lay not in public opinion or societal expectations, but in their commitment to each other and their shared values. In the weeks that followed, they worked tirelessly to rebuild trust with the public, with the music industry, and with themselves. Lucy began to explore her own musical talents, no longer afraid of comparisons to her mother. Jonathan threw himself into reforming his business practices, inspired by the ethical standards they were setting at the Foundation. Slowly but surely, their efforts began to bear fruit. The Foundation's new initiatives were making real changes in the industry. Young musicians and their families began to share stories of how the reformed practices had positively impacted their lives. Even some of Jonathan's business associates, initially skeptical, started to see the value in his more ethical approach. Evelyn Hartley and her allies found themselves increasingly isolated as more people aligned with Jonathan's vision. Arthur Steinway, inspired by the Foundation's work, began a campaign within his own company to address historical wrongs and create a more artist-friendly business model. As the dust began to settle, Jonathan, Lucy, and Max found themselves at a new beginning. The path ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges and potential pitfalls. But they faced it together, no longer a millionaire, a waitress, and a prodigy brought together by chance, but a family united by love, shared purpose, and the transformative power of music. The conflict wasn't fully resolved. There would always be critics and skeptics, but in their attempt to address it head-on, with honesty and integrity, they had laid the groundwork for lasting, positive change. As they looked to the future, they did so not with fear, but with hope and determination. 6 months after the tumultuous gala, Jonathan stood on the stage of a small community center in Brooklyn. The room was filled not with celebrities or wealthy donors, but with children from underprivileged backgrounds, all eager to learn about music. "Welcome to the first Elizabeth Caldwell Foundation Music Camp," Jonathan announced, his face beaming with genuine joy. "Over the next 2 weeks, you'll have the chance to explore various instruments, learn about different musical styles, and most importantly, discover the joy of creating music." This camp represented a new direction for the foundation. Instead of focusing solely on nurturing prodigies or preserving classical music traditions, they had expanded their mission to make music education accessible to all children, regardless of their background or perceived talent. Lucy, standing at the back of the room, felt a surge of pride as she watched Jonathan interact with the children. He was in his element, his usual corporate demeanor replaced by an almost childlike enthusiasm. Max, now 13, was there too. Not as a performer, but as a peer mentor. He moved among the younger children, offering encouragement and sharing his love for music in a way that was free from the pressures of public performance. This new direction hadn't come easily. It had required a complete reevaluation of the foundation's goals and Jonathan's own ideas about success and impact. But as he watched the children's faces light up at the sound of a perfectly struck piano key or the blast of a trumpet, he knew they had made the right choice. The turning point had come during a late-night conversation with Lucy, months earlier. "What if," she had mused, "we could give every child the chance to fall in love with music, the way Max did? Not to make them stars, but to enrich their lives?" That simple question had sparked a revolution in their approach. They had shifted their focus from the concert halls to the classrooms, from child prodigies to music educators. The foundation now provided instruments to underfunded schools, sponsored after-school music programs, and offered scholarships for music therapy. As the camp session began in earnest, with the sounds of tentative notes and joyful laughter filling the air, Jonathan felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced in his years of corporate success. He caught Lucy's eye across the room, and they shared a smile of quiet understanding. This was more than a new direction for the foundation. It was a new chapter in their lives, one where the measure of success wasn't in dollars earned or accolades received, but in the number of lives touched and the joy of music shared. As Jonathan turned back to the eager faces of the children, he knew that this journey, which had begun with an impulsive invitation to a waitress and her son, was far from over. But for the first time in his life, he was excited about an uncertain future, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, with Lucy and Max by his side. As the Elizabeth Caldwell Foundation Music Camp drew to a close, Jonathan found himself sitting alone on the small stage of the community center, long after the last child had left. The room, still echoing with the ghosts of enthusiastic music making, provided the perfect backdrop for reflection. He thought back to the man he had been just a year and a half ago, successful by every conventional measure, yet profoundly empty. The Jonathan of the past would have scoffed at the idea of spending 2 weeks teaching basic piano to inner-city kids. Now he couldn't imagine anything more fulfilling. His growth hadn't just been in his priorities and values. Jonathan realized he had developed emotionally in ways he never thought possible. He had learned to be vulnerable, to connect with others on a deeper level. The walls he had built around himself over years in the cutthroat business world had crumbled, replaced by a newfound openness and empathy. Lucy's influence on this transformation was undeniable. Her strength, her resilience, and her capacity for forgiveness had shown Jonathan a different way of navigating life's challenges. He had learned from her that true strength often lies in admitting one's vulnerabilities and facing them head-on. As if summoned by his thoughts, Lucy appeared in the doorway. "There you are," she said softly, coming to sit beside him. "Penny for your thoughts?" Jonathan smiled, taking her hand in his. "I was just thinking about how much has changed, how much I've changed." Lucy nodded, understanding in her eyes. "You're not the only one. I look at myself now, and I hardly recognize the woman who was so afraid of her own past, so determined to keep Max from his heritage." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both contemplating their journeys. "You know," Jonathan said finally, "I used to think that growth meant accumulating more wealth, more power, more status. But now I realize it's often about letting go of preconceptions, of fear, of the need to control everything." Lucy squeezed his hand. "That's beautiful, Jonathan, and so true." Their moment of reflection was interrupted by Max, bounding into the room with his usual energy. "Mom, Jonathan, you've got to see this. I've been working on a new composition, inspired by the kids at the camp." As Max sat at the piano and began to play, Jonathan and Lucy exchanged a glance. The music was beautiful, but what struck them most was the joy on Max's face. He was playing not for acclaim or out of obligation, but purely for the love of it. Jonathan felt a lump form in his throat. Max, too, had grown so much. The pressure and anxiety that had once threatened to overwhelm him had been replaced by a genuine, grounded passion for music. As the last notes faded away, Jonathan realized that this moment of shared joy, of music freely given and received, was what true wealth felt like. The young boy's tears on a New York street corner had set in motion a chain of events that had not just changed lives, but had taught all of them the true meaning of success and fulfillment. Lucy, seeming to read his thoughts, leaned her head on his shoulder. "Who would have thought," she murmured, "that a chance encounter could lead to all this?" Jonathan wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "I guess sometimes the most important melodies in our lives start with the simplest notes," he replied. As they sat there, the small family unit brought together by fate and forged by choice, Jonathan knew that their story was far from over. There would be more challenges, more growth, more music to be made. But together, they were ready to face whatever symphony life had in store for them next. 1 year to the day after the fateful birthday party that had changed everything, Jonathan, Lucy, and Max stood together on the stage of Carnegie Hall. But this time, they weren't there to perform. Instead, they were addressing a packed house of music industry leaders, educators, and young musicians. "A year ago," Jonathan began, "I thought I knew what success looked like. I thought it was about wealth, influence, and personal gain. But thanks to an extraordinary woman and her remarkably talented son, I learned that true success is measured by the lives we touch and the positive change we create in the world." Lucy stepped forward, her eyes shining. "We stand here today, not as individuals, but as representatives of a movement to make music education accessible to all, to nurture talent ethically and sustainably, and to use the power of music to bridge divides and heal wounds." Max, now more comfortable in the spotlight but for entirely different reasons, spoke last. "My journey taught me that music isn't just about performance or perfection. It's about expression, connection, and joy. Every child deserves the chance to experience that, regardless of their background or circumstances." As they concluded their speech, announcing a nationwide initiative to bring music education to underserved communities, the hall erupted in applause. The standing ovation wasn't just for them, but for the vision they represented. A vision of a world where art and commerce could coexist ethically, where talent was nurtured with compassion, and where music could be a force for positive change. In that moment, as the applause washed over them, Jonathan, Lucy, and Max knew that their impromptu family unit, forged in the crucible of chance and choice, had become something larger than themselves. They had become a symphony of hope, their individual melodies blending into a powerful harmony.